Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. I would like to invite you at today's webinar organized by the American Chamber of Commerce in Slovakia and the Slovak Alliance for Innovation Economy. My name is Michal Kardoš and I'm the Executive Director of the Slovak Alliance for Innovation Economy. We are here today in order to discuss the most important regulation in the digital world in the last 20 years.
Thank you, Michal, and I would also like to welcome you, dear viewers, on behalf of AmCham, the American Chamber of Commerce in Slovakia. My name is Gabriela Šaturová and I'm a policy officer at AmCham. We're here to discuss two very important legal acts that will shape the EU's digital market in the next years. We're also following up on our webinar in December that we held just one day before the draft acts were published. So finally, we are able to discuss the proposed legislation and follow up on the debate that took place beforehand, organized also together with SAPIE. We support the objective of the European Commission's legal acts. However, it is very important to note that any new rules should continue to encourage innovation and enhance competition and consumer welfare. And as the EU updates its regulation, it should ensure that the new rules don't add undue costs and burden for European businesses, and that an interplay and clarity with existing provisions both at the EU and national level is secured. That is why we find a broad discussion crucial, and we find it very important to find the right balance between the interests of large digital players, but also the interests and competitiveness of SMEs and startups. And we are very happy that we found a very balanced and interesting panel of speakers with also public sector representatives, startups representatives, and basically we are here to kick off the discussion with the aim to provide a platform when the national positions are forming at this stage. Thank you very much, and hope you will have some questions for our speakers at the end. Thank you.
And before we start the discussion, I would like to start with a short position of the Slovak Alliance for Innovation Economy, SAPIE. While we agree updating of the contemporary legislation is necessary, SAPIE prefers an approach that would create clear, predictable and fair conditions valid for all business entities within the sector. The universality as a principle should follow from the fact that several key aspects at stake are independent of the size of the companies. The proposed solutions should be based on the principles of freedom of enterprise, support for innovation, and at the same time, clearly enforceable rules that are acceptable to all players. This would ensure a more sustainable achievement of the desired results in combination with a fair balance in the established relationship between key stakeholders. SAPIE recognizes that the current situation with respect to the fragmented nature of the regulation of digital markets has called for a European approach to harmonize legislation and remove barriers to complete the formation of the digital single market. At the same time, it understands the importance that these markets have for both sides of trade, the businesses as well as customers. For entrepreneurs, this is a unique space where they can minimize their operating costs and continue their business in times of pandemic. It motivates them to find new technological solutions and incorporate them into their business practice. Last but not least, digital marketplaces allow entrepreneurs to significantly expand the reach of their goods and services. Digital space minimizes the negative impact of the geographical distances and allowing even small businesses and individuals to do business with customers in other parts of the country or across borders. But the other side of this coin is also important. During the pandemic as well as beyond, digital markets are a unique place where people in more remote parts of the country or people isolated through age or disability can get a much wider range of goods and services in a more accessible way, greatly increasing their chances of living and fulfilling life. It is precisely these factors that we must keep in mind when trying to update European legislation, especially one that has the ambition to introduce new, harmonized rules for the protection of competition in the digital space. While this goal is commendably and fully supported by SAPIE, the legislation must be drafted very carefully to avoid possible unintended impacts. In the worst case, this change may bring disproportionate burden in terms of time and financial cost for businesses down the line if the services that they rely on today become unavailable or more costly as a result, limiting their options by edging out services that are currently perceived as too large might not be the best solutions, especially for small and medium-sized businesses in export-dependent countries like Slovakia. We should avoid trying to promote the growth of European digital economy through regulation and instead focus on fostering a truly innovation and investment-friendly environment so that our digital champions can grow naturally. Thank you very much. Without any further ado, I would like to pass the floor and the word to our moderator of today's event, Lucia Jar. Thank you very much. Lucia, please, the floor is yours.
And thank you very much for introduction. As it was said, my name is Lucia Jar. I'm the Deputy Editor-in-Chief at Euractiv Portal, and it's really my great honor and pleasure to be with you today to moderate this event, which we really considerably chose really fantastic speakers that we have. Together with SAPIE and AmCham, we have prepared the event that is following the debate, which we had almost 3 months ago, shortly before presenting the major legislation that, as it was said, is going to fundamentally change the idea of online businesses, of the internet as we see it today. The 3 pieces of legislation that were introduced in March were Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, and Data Governance Act. We will mostly focus today on the first 2 of them. Especially Digital Services Act, which concerns mostly online services, hosting and intermediary services, as well as very large online platforms. The major idea behind it, which European Commission had when presenting this legislation, was that DSA should enhance the transparency as well as safety of the internet. The DMA legislation, which concerns the market, is going to establish the criteria for so-called gatekeepers, which are the large companies with strong economic intermediation as well as durable position. The idea behind the second legislation is to enable larger competition within the European Union. But whether was the European Commission successful, what are the first major reactions? All of this we will discuss today with our speakers. I will introduce them very shortly. Before that, I want to also introduce you the way how to participate at our debate, because obviously this debate is mostly for you and we are very much interested in your opinion. Regarding the opinion, we set up a poll on Slido, which you can enter by writing slido.com or slide.do and entering the hashtag DSA-DMA. Now all is written together. We have the question for you. Are you concerned that the new DSA-DMA legislation will negatively influence your business models? We're also very much concerned about that and looking forward to what you have to say. Secondly, the option over there with the same hashtag DSA-DMA all together, or all capitals, written at Slido. Please be so kind to help us, send us some questions. We will definitely address them to the right person today. So, and now to the speakers. It's really my pleasure. They are waiting with us for some time, but very kind panelists today. Mr. Ivan Štefanec, member of the European Parliament for Slovakia and for European People's Party. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody.
Thank you for coming and connecting. Mr. Jan Oravec, Deputy Minister of Economy of Slovak Republic. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Benedikt Blumeyer, who is EU Policy Director at Allied for Startups, representing mostly startups and small and medium enterprises. Thank you for coming.
Good morning.
Connecting. We would wish that you could come next time you come. And Ms. Siada El Ramli, Director General at .Europe, representing larger enterprises. Welcome, Siada.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me.
Perfect. So we explained everything. We have our panelists. Let's start with a short introductory remarks, which I will address, where I would like you to focus mostly on the benefits and on risks, because we have heard that the legislation already was presented. It has 3 months. You and people you represent, or businesses you represent, have already had a chance to kind of wrap up their reactions. So let's start with Mr. Štefanec, if I can ask. Now I don't see you, but hopefully you can follow with us. Maybe your introductory remarks and the evaluation from the point of view of the citizens, and maybe also from the institutions, European Parliament, what are the benefits and risks that these two legislations are bringing to us?
So once again, thanks a lot for invitation. I do believe that these two pieces of legislation, DSA and DMA, are the crucial pieces of legislation for this year, which will shape the European and probably also the global digital market for the next couple of years. During pandemic, all of us, we moved to digital world, so we know how it is important to have right setup of the rules. And also, I have to say that current rules are 20 years old, particularly talking about e-commerce. So it's very clear that we have to talk about new rules, which must be prepared very carefully. And if they are prepared carefully and in the right way, I do hope that they might become also global rules, that also other parts of world, they will adapt the rules which European Union will set up. What is also important that we will agree on the rules for the whole European Union, because there are also some initiatives from member states which are quite disturbing, that they would like to regulate digital market, and I see it quite dangerously. So we have to be quite fast, and we have to prepare this year, this set of rules, and we have to come to the agreement also in the European Parliament with Council and Commission about these rules. As it was said already, DSM and DMA is already in the Parliament. There is a political agreement that EPP party, my political party, will drive DMA, and Socialist Party will drive, as the reporter, DSA. So it is the decision from political perspective, but of course there is the need for general political consensus. I think the general wish is to create really the rules which are simple, stable, and which provide safety for digital space with guarantee fundamental rights for all the users. I think it's important that we also create level playing field for innovation, growth, and competitiveness. As it was already highlighted by SAPIE, I see it very, very important that this set of legislation will provide good space for, particularly for SMEs, because currently 90% of platforms are small and medium entrepreneurs. So we have to give the right space for SMEs, which will drive, I do hope, will drive economical recovery of the European Union, particularly after pandemic. So we have to have the freedom, definitely, and what we would like to achieve also by negotiation in the Parliament, we would like to improve the fight against illegal our users and all the stakeholders. I think transparency is very, very important. And as I mentioned, I do believe that new rules will foster innovation, growth, and competitiveness. It's very clear that there must be the right set of rules for new responsibilities, not only of users, but platforms and public authorities. which are rebalanced according to our European values. As I mentioned, SMEs, I think it's very clear that if we have the right environment for SMEs, also consumer will benefit from having more choices and lower prices at the end and better services. So it's important to have very easy and clear ways to report illegal contact for goods or services on online platform, and also we should protect citizens supervising platforms and enforcing rules across the union. Talking about digital market acts, I would like to highlight that what I see is very important to have ex ante regulation, not ex post, but ex ante regulation about the gatekeeper behavior, which is acceptable, as well as targeted market investigation. So that's probably the most important part of DMA, to have ex ante regulation. And I'd like to mention just 3 points there. We would like to allow third parties to interoperate with gatekeepers' own services in certain specific situations. Secondly, we would like to allow the business users to access data and generate their use of the gatekeepers platform. And thirdly, last but not least, information should be for advertisers and publishers should be carried out by independent verification of their advertisement hosted by the gatekeeper. So we are really talking about new set of rules, which I do believe will shape our digital single market positively. So thank you very much indeed. I'm looking forward to discussion.
Perfect. Thank you very much for evaluating. I am definitely going to be interested in breaking down some of the points that you made regarding the ex ante, but especially also some, you mentioned disturbing or dangerous initiatives of some other states or some maybe other organizations. So I will definitely get back to it in a second round. Now I'm going to give a floor to Mr. Jan Oravec, who is going to hopefully give some introductory remarks regarding the Slovak economy and their maybe ideas or reactions to the Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today with the panelists. I'm looking forward to the debate, and I need to tell you a little secret. When I was listening to Ivan Štefanec, we spent with Ivan maybe 20 years ago some time in the National Union of Employers defending interests of Slovak businesses, both domestically and also at international level. So I see, Ivan, that you are on the road, and I'm looking forward to our debate on many other issues, not only this one. What concerns this legislation, as it was mentioned in the beginning, it's a relatively new thing. It was approved or it was published by European Commission on December 15. So it's a relatively recent thing also for Slovak authorities. Since December 15, we had a very quick debate within the structures of Slovak government who will be taking the responsibility for these acts. And there were 2 natural candidates. One was MIRI, the Ministry for Innovation and Informatization, and the other one was Ministry of Economy. The final result of that debate is that it will be the Ministry of Economy that will be responsible, of course, in a close cooperation with MIRI. So we will be sort of very closely coordinating our activities. And this debate is, its timing is very, or it's excellent, I would say, because this week at the Ministry of Economy, we have approved we green-lighted these proposals on information about the consultation on both acts and they will be next week sent to the process of interministerial comments. So they will be opened to consultation also not only to businesses but to general public. And it was 2 days ago when we approved that. So starting from next week, I am looking forward to all inputs that will be sent to us and all possible, interactions with all involved subjects. What concerns the risks or benefits, of course, the major risk is that those benefits that are presented as the benefits will not materialize, and that there will be some risks that as a consequence of what we can say will be unintended consequences of good intentions. So this is probably the major risk. And of course, on one side, it is natural to say that the single market also for digital services is the crucial factor, and that we need to avoid the fragmentation of regulation. That's absolutely correct, and we will support that. But on the other side, at the same time, there is the same risk that this harmonization approach will eliminate what we can call regulatory competition. And the regulatory competition sometimes is not a bad thing. It can actually produce better results, regulatory competition, than the solution that is harmonized if it is the bad solution. So this is the important thing to say. And what concerns the unintended consequences, again, we are debating that these initiatives are important to enhance competition, to enhance innovation, and we probably all subscribed to that intention. But in fact, as an unintended consequence, it might, if it will not be drafted well, it might prevent competition, and it might prevent innovation. This is the major risk we are running, and that is why we need to have a very thorough debate and very balanced approach. What concerns Slovak policymakers, of course, we look at these proposals from point of view of Slovak businesses, and all Slovak businesses are business users of digital services, and that is why, of course, the debate about the potential risk of using market power of big companies or misusing that power is, of course, the regular or legitimate debate. But on the other side, we need to keep in mind that even Slovak SMEs, even Slovak startups, can be the competitors of the giant companies. And if we will try to impose too heavy burden on these giant companies, we can kill also the small SMEs and the small startups. And this is the major thing we need to keep in mind, I think. Finally, what is important to say that I have mentioned the consultations we started. The interministerial comment to this procedure will be kicked off next week. And the end of this procedure in Slovakia is the approval of the Slovak position in the European Affairs Committee of the Slovak Parliament. And in the meantime, I am looking forward to debate this important issue with all representatives of the businesses, employer organizations, business organizations, innovative alliances, etc., because I think it is in interest of all Slovak policymakers, Slovak businesses, any other European policymakers, any other European businesses to strike the right balance. And this is, I think, the last sentence and my message to this panel, and also to the debate that I expect will be very intense in Slovakia in upcoming years, upcoming weeks. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the words, and also giving us the breaking news, if I can say that, the consultation that many companies, many customers and many organizations are waiting for, that they will start next week. So thank you for the information. And again, we will get to a couple of points that you raised in your remarks. Now let's go to Benedict Blumeyer, whose organization is representing SMEs and mostly startups. So I'm interested in the benefits and risks of your I would say customers, but the organizations that you represent. What are their concerns, and what are their hopes for the legislation?
Thanks so much. Yeah, and I think it's a super timely debate, and I'd like to just begin by introducing us, if that's okay. Alliance for Startups, those who don't know us, is a global network of startup organizations ranging from Startup Canada to Austrian startups to Startup Malaysia. Our goal is to indeed represent the startups in policy discussions. And yeah, you are obviously right that the DSA and DMA are super big dossiers, and they're addressing many challenges and have many proposed remedies. And I'd like to just begin by sharing a bit about our approach to these files, and then I'll give a mini intro into what we think about the DSA and DMA. So that being said, how we approach these files is we come at this from the point that startups are the key innovators and competitors in the digital single market. And actually, there's already over 10,000 high growth platforms in Europe. So this is not just about an abstract future, as Mr. Stefanec rightly said. It's about thinking about the providers of growth and jobs today. Secondly, we see that startups are born in and scale in very interconnected ecosystems. This was also already said. I find myself in agreement with a lot of my previous speakers' comments. Today, entrepreneurs use hundreds of free platforms to set up, organize, manage, and promote their business globally. This enables entrepreneurs to focus on their customers and on scaling up their product. So in this process, we see startups become customers, complements, and competitors of established players, and vice versa. So it's quite a complicated interdependence in reality. And thirdly, we think of startups as the most consumer-focused businesses in history. Their best chance of being successful against incumbents is to be positively obsessed about meeting the needs of their users and developing new ways to meet them. So what does this say about what we think about the DSA and the DMA? Well, as it was kind of said already before, indeed, the DSA can update, harmonize, as Mr. Stefanec pointed out, there's been a lot of fragmentation, and clarify the e-commerce directive, which is a framework which has allowed many of our ecosystems across Europe to thrive. And of course, just as in other economic sectors that mature, new challenges arise, and we need to think about where the DSA can update the rulebook, but also to make sure we don't forget where the e-commerce directive has served us well in the past. And I just point to 2 points to kick us off here from our side. We feel strongly that the DSA should not undermine the country of origin principle, which is called the internal market clause, with also on the front of the enforcement of the DSA, that we have a system with the country of origin that a Slovak platform will be responsible and interacting with the Slovak Digital Service Coordinator at the end of the day. And secondly, on the DSA, we really think it's already going to be a big file as it is, but we think we shouldn't go beyond targeting illegal content with this file. So it's already going to be a lot to understand what is illegal content in different member states. So we think that we shouldn't go beyond it in this file, but we can address harmful content in other files where there is a consensus on that. And briefly on the DMA, well, our members are looking forward to the DMA indeed addressing systemic market failures with policy measures, if necessary, with bans. And some of the things that were mentioned, more portability, interoperability. If there's an anti-bullying clause, these are things that our members are definitely supportive of. But we also, and this is again echoing what Mr. Oberreich said at the start, is need to make sure we're not having unintended consequences for the ecosystem. And there's two things I would throw into the discussion on the DMA here. One is that although you're right, this is targeting these big gatekeeper companies, there is a clause in Article 3.6 actually, which gives the Commission the permission to go beyond these thresholds that are set, quantitative and qualitative thresholds, and say, we think you will be a big company soon, and we therefore can designate you. Of course, there's a process, but it can designate you even if you are not yet meeting these thresholds as a gatekeeper. And we are a bit critical that this is not really setting a sign of confidence and of encouraging innovation and growth through the ecosystem. And that if you make a threshold, then you should be the first one to follow it. And the second point on the DMA where we are a bit concerned is that we don't want to have prohibitions and obligations put in place which interfere with what we call the startup life cycle. And what we mean by this is the prospect for startups to getting a high valuation, to having an exit, to doing an M&A. Exits, M&A, and rising investment are actually signs of a successful ecosystem, that innovation is working, and end up being, we know from experience, multipliers for the ecosystem. You know the famous example of the Estonian mafia or the Criteo mafia in Paris. These are communities of entrepreneurs which were unleashed on the ecosystem after successful exits, and we want to have more of those at the end of the day. So very much looking to make sure that the DMA does not have unintended consequences on the startup and scale-up ecosystem. And I think I'll leave it here for the moment. I'm looking forward to your questions and to the discussion.
Thank you, Benedikt, for again bringing up some important points. I'm hoping to break them all down. I will also encourage you, our audience, to send us questions. We are collecting them, and we will be glad to find responses together with our panelists. And last but not least, certainly Siada El Ramli, whose organization .Europe is representing leading internet companies in Europe. So from you, I would like to know kind of overview of or reactions of the large companies. What do they consider to be benefits as well as risks?
Happy to talk. Thank you so much for having me, as I said. So I'm only going to be talking about the DSA, just to kind of preface what I'm going to be talking about. And the reason is that we have a consensus-based trade association. So that means that any position we come up with has to have the full backing of all of our members. And trying to get 21 companies in different sizes and business models to agree on the DMA is very difficult. So we've decided to leave that up to the companies to advocate on. And we're working on the DSA, which is an issue that's very close to our heart, because we have been doing for about 3.5 years some work on online responsibility of our membership and what that actually means. We're in a world where content is key and has so many different forms. We've recognized that there were actual concerns about how content is moderated and what does that mean in terms of our responsibility to act responsibly, us as platforms in most cases, but not only the platforms, so everybody that's involved in content and dissemination as a whole. So as such, we were very encouraged that the Commission also tried to propose a horizontal framework to give an approach to content moderation. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that it's the only legislation that will be there to regulate this area. It means that this will come in as the umbrella, the horizontal piece, in which all the verticals like terrorist content, or now they're looking at child sexual abuse material, harmful content is again a whole separate area. So we're focusing here on illegal content, that we have an approach to how to deal with illegal content online. So we're encouraged that that proposal is out, but we also think that there's a lot of work still to be done. There's a lot of questions that we have, and we're just in the process of finalizing a first questions paper that we have on chapters 1 to 3 of the DSA, which is already 27 pages of questions. So you can imagine how many questions we have as to what this piece really means. And when we're talking about very large online platforms and they're talking about users, are we counting number of eyeballs? Are we counting number of users that have an account? Are we talking, what does that mean? And how do we quantify that to make sure that it creates legal certainty instead of creating more burdens? We can't count on all of companies across Europe to have major legal teams to be able to figure out where there's overlap. And just a bit of unashamed self-promotion here for a second. We actually did an exercise in mapping the overlap between the DSA and pieces of legislation that are already in place with obligations on content moderation. You can find it on our website, but you'll see it's a very long list. And we need to make sure that there's a coherence there, that the pieces of legislation that are already in place work hand in hand with the DSA, that we don't have a situation where, for example, MEP Stefanic rightly pointed out that we need to have transparency. Very true. But we already have, for example, in the platform to business regulation that was passed, transparency obligations there. We have transparency obligations towards the consumers that were passed in the omnibus. So how do we make sure that all these transparency obligations work together instead of being conflictual? Another area, so we were asked especially to look at what the impact might be on companies in Slovakia and in Central European countries. And I think it's not only for Central Europe, but in general, I think one thing to bear in mind as well is how will these obligations translate in actual effect? So where at the moment the codes of practice will be of most relevance to the very large online platforms, what will the codes of practice mean for the governments in some of the member states as well? How are we going to have the DSCs? Who are going to be the DSCs? How will they be coordinated? Will they be one and the same as the regulators that are dealing with audiovisual services, for example? Or will they be the same competent authorities that we're working with on terrorist content regulation? So how do we make sure that there's coherence in what is being asked? And that there's clarity for everybody as to who they need to work with. I think that's going to become very important. And then last but not least is to make sure that there is enough recognition for the diverse services that are included. Because the scope of this piece is already so broad, and as time goes by, we're seeing that it's becoming a little bit of a Christmas tree, where everybody wants to bring their issues to the table. And we desperately need to get this piece off the ground. Again, referring to a comment that was made by MP Stefanic, where he said there are national initiatives coming off the ground, and if we're not quick enough in finding a solution and really coming to a good result on resolving the issues that we have with the DSA proposal, in the meantime there will be national initiatives that are in place that will probably conflict to what the plan is here. So we need speed, we need efficiency, and when I say we, all of us, in terms of institutional stakeholders, but also us as industry, we really need to make our mark and move forward so that we don't miss out. It is an opportunity for the EU to make its mark in terms of digital policy, like what happened in GDPR. And you can be pro or against the GDPR and how effective it is, but at the end of the day, it was a momentous event. It put Europe on the global map in terms of digital policy making, and I think this is yet another moment where that could happen. However, we need to get this done, and so we're only looking forward to actually figuring out all these bits that are still grey and vague. And we look forward to working with everybody on this file.
Okay.
So
thank you very much for breaking out. And clearly there are plenty of questions that also your companies are having. So as we understood so far, we do have national interests, we have interests of businesses, smaller businesses, large businesses, consumers all together, and the major risk seems to be not to make the major piece of legislation that is ahead of us to look like a Christmas tree, as Siara correctly mentioned. So how to get away from that? This will be kind of a second line of the discussion that we will have over here. Again, I will turn to our audience to not to be shy, to really contribute to the debate. We already have some questions. We will get to them. The hashtag in order to pose a question at Slido is DSA-DMA, so as a shortcut for our legislation. And also we have a poll available where you can answer the question. We will be very interested in knowing what do you think so far. Seems that most of the people do not have many information, so I hope that by the end of this discussion we will help as well. Let's get back to our discussion. Mr. Štefanic, you have already mentioned that many countries, so far we are hearing about countries, have some disturbing, I will quote you, disturbing or dangerous initiatives that are being put already. We've heard of them. Many countries are already deciding to take their own way, implementing their own policies at a certain level. Obviously, they will be waiting also in order to decide how to get this big piece of legislation together. But what do you see as the major disturbances or dangerous initiatives that are currently at the table, perhaps?
Well, you are right, it's very dangerous, and currently probably the initiatives from France is the most dangerous one, but also there is some activity in Austria, and also other countries. They are starting to talk about some national pieces of legislation. I found it really quite dangerous. I think if we talk about digital single market, we have to talk about unified legislation. And as also other speakers rightly pointed out, we have to talk about horizontal framework for this. My another point would be it must be complemented by, for example, copyright directive or GDPR, etc. But we have to have horizontal framework of legislation, and definitely we have to have very clear rules for European single market. How we can avoid it? Well, we can avoid it by our transparent approach at the European Parliament, talking with Council and the European Commission as well. We are on the same level, I would say, European institutions. I do believe in good cooperation with national governments as well. I was pleased what was mentioned also by my very good friend Jan Oravec, that they have started also open consultation and they involve also European Affairs Committee in the Parliament. It's a positive thing. I do believe also that there will be right cooperation between Slovak government and European institutions as well. And I'm sure about it. I'm sure with these people like Jan Oravec and others, they are very open also and pro-business minded. That's very important to set that we are pro-business, and if we are pro-business, we are pro-consumer, because at the end, consumer will benefit. Consumer will benefit from a set of rules which are clear, which are stable, which are certain for next couple of years, and which are unified for European Union. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. A little follow-up question to that. You've already mentioned that SND, the socialists in the European Parliament, are going to lead the DSA legislation. The EPP is going to lead mostly the DMA legislation. There have been already some rumors, some ideas about what are these parties are going to present, or what is their opinion. For instance, Greens are already explaining that the whole legislation is falling very short. EPP and SND they want to discuss. Do you have some like base rules within the EPP or the basic discussion ongoing on the topic, what do you think will be the major points that your party wants to bring to the table?
Well, yes, it's at the end about political discussion among the groups, but I'm quite positive. You know, traditionally, it's not a secret that traditionally EPP, Renew Group, Liberals, and even ECR, they are more pro-business oriented than others. But I have also not bad feeling with SND now. We have also some good common platform, good common base for understanding what is important, what is not. Well, as it works in the European Parliament, every political group has set up already shadow reporter, and this discussion is quite wide. I have to say it started quite wide, which is a positive. And even in our group, we have special meetings, and we don't have only one single person who is responsible of that, but we have many MEPs, including myself, who are responsible for certain pieces of this legislation, and at the end we will put our position. We have already set up our guidelines, our red lines in step by step. There are plenty of them.
Could you
of course it will be
at least some red line,
yes,
maybe to be a little bit more specific.
Yeah. One of them is that it should be horizontal legislation, I mentioned. Another is level playing field. Another one is the scope for digital single market. It should be not fragmented. Another one is to harmonize the existing rules on the removal of illegal content, which is a special topic. How to remove this context. We are saying that we should set up a definition on minimum of what harmful content is, at least. So this is, for example, our red line. And different groups, they have different red lines, and we are just negotiating. It's just the normal process. Question is time, because we are also pushed by business, which is understandable, and by consumers. So I do hope that this year we will come with the positive result.
Thank you very much. Mr. Oravec, we've discussed with Mr. Štefanec that there are certain positions of the countries already quite known. We know that some seem to be rather disturbing. In Slovakia, I think it's a very good idea that we found a leading ministry that also took us several weeks, if I may be that gentle. I understand that there is going to be the Ministry of Economy involved, Ministry of Informatization very much involved, and perhaps in some matters also Ministry of Culture, as we talk about some media or a content at the platforms. Obviously, other ministries as well. But how do you envision the upcoming discussion to be? Is there any time frame? What are you expecting to get out of that discussion that will be coming, as you said, next week?
Yeah, debate will start the next week, and what we expect is after the debate, which will take several weeks, to have the official position of Slovakia. We will submit to the Parliament, to the EU Affairs Committee, and if approved, this position, this will be the starting negotiation position for Slovakia at Council. So that's the process. That's the process. But let me come back also to the one important thing that was mentioned by Ivan Štefanec, that that I'm a pro-business, and of course to be a pro-consumer is at the same time being the pro-business, and that's very true, and since I was representing for more than 20 years the businesses, and I am here now at the leadership of Ministry of Economy, some people working on consumer protection expected that they would be having a hard time, but in fact, opposite. I made completely the opposite thing. The consumer protection at the Ministry of Economy was just one of many departments. And I've made a decision to make from Consumer Protection Unit one of the 7 major sections in order to increase the importance of consumer protection, and I will tell you why. The consumer protection is traditionally perceived as some sort of weapon of citizens as the consumers against businesses. And that's a very old-fashioned approach. When you look at the real situation, the citizens, households are just one type of consumers that are consuming the products and services of the businesses, but there are also the businesses that are the consumers, and they are consuming the services and products of other businesses. And the very modern approach I try to push here at the ministry is that the consumer protection is very important thing, not only for protection of interests of households or citizens, but it is most important thing to protect fair businesses against unfair businesses. And this is one of the major priorities here at the Ministry of Economy.
Do you think that Slovakia could, similarly to France, similarly to Austria that we've already mentioned, bring up or come up with their own legislation regarding some of the topics that Digital Services Act or Digital Markets Act would cover before perhaps 2023? If the discussions, as we are already suggesting, will take long, if the discussions will get way too complicated, do you think that Slovakia will be approaching the issue by its own legislation?
Well, I think that this conclusion will be depending on the debate we will be having, on the results of that debate. And I see that there is a very important element of the proposal, which is the market oversight. And if I understand that correctly, in case of Digital Services Act, it is expected a sort of shared oversight of member states and European Commission. And in case of Digital Market Act, it is the European Commission that will be responsible for market oversight. And again, you know, the devil lies in the details. So I'm looking forward to the debate. I'm looking forward to inputs of all, you know, stakeholders, so to say, big businesses, small businesses, startups, SMEs, general public, and we will make the conclusion based on reflections of the major inputs of this debate.
Thank you for that. Benedict, question to you. Yes, you want to react, and I also first react, and then let's continue with the debate. Go ahead.
It's relevant for us that our membership doesn't think it's helpful for member states to be going solo, especially while we are actually in the process of making a European piece of legislation. It's not helping to depoliticize the process in Brussels to that. And our approach here is that, you know, the DSM the digital single market should be about preventing that startups have to scale up in Europe 27 times. And I kind of was thinking of just injecting one example to the debate. So when the Network Enforcement Act in Germany passed, this was a really big deal for the startups. And there's a famous example of a platform in Germany which is always staying under 2 million users, kicking out the most inactive ones, so it doesn't get into the threshold. Yeah. That's I think, the dynamic we want to really avoid. And then if you kind of multiply this, you know, we had SoundCloud on a panel last year, and they were sharing their experience of having gone through NetzDG, network enforcement, and then Loavia coming in France. This tripled the costs of their trust and safety team, and this is just 2 countries. And bigger companies might have already a foothold in all the member states, but for smaller companies trying to scale up across the continent, this is really a recipe not for success.
Exactly, this was kind of touching what I wanted to ask you, whether you are afraid, we understood from the legislation that larger you are, more responsibilities you get, right? So isn't there a fear that if the startup will scale up, eventually growing, they will maybe, in order to avoid more regulation, they will either split or not really want to scale up in a way that perhaps even reaching the gatekeepers level? Is there some kind of fear? This is exactly the question of innovation that you mentioned at the beginning. Is among the startups such a fear that this could be an influence? We also have a question related to this, so I'm kind of paraphrasing.
Yeah, no, I think exactly the dynamic we want to avoid. Especially kind of from a startup perspective, your goal is to scale up fast. And if every time we make thresholds in the road, we're turning the race from being a scale up from a 100-meter sprint to a 110-meter hurdle race, really. So ideally, we want to make rules that are proportionate, where startups can think about complying and start complying from day one, and they don't have a kind of set of thresholds in the way, but at the same time, acknowledging that they have less resources available to them. And it's not an easy thing to do, for sure, but the dynamic is one where we want to end up saying that startups are motivated to be compliant, to be in the scope of the DSA, rather than trying to skirt around the edges and not be in the scope, right?
Mm-hmm. So do you think that the Commission should create the really detailed explanation that would divide either gatekeepers or startups, or what should the what should the discussion be in order to really avoid it? How would you approach it if you have that power, let's say?
And I think we have to distinguish between the DSA and the DMA.
Yeah, absolutely,
here.
Yes.
So on the side of the DMA, we acknowledge that there's really high thresholds right now. 45 users, 6.5 billion euro revenue. That's really high, and that's only affecting a very select few companies. But the point I made in the outset as well is that if we make this threshold, it's going to be really important that it inspires confidence in the market. So we are critical of the Commission giving itself the additional right to go below this threshold with Article 3.6 and saying, hey, we think you're going to be a gatekeeper one day. We will already designate you in part as a gatekeeper today. Then our members are asking us, okay, so what's the point of making a threshold in the first place? So I would look to correct that, or at very least scope that Article 3.6 in a lot more closely. And on the DSA side, it's pretty complicated because we have, as you said, we have exemptions for some things for very small businesses, and then we have the kind of the rules for everyone else, and then we have special rules for the very large online players. So you're actually making sort of a three-tier system after all. I mean, it has to be proportionate to the risk, that is clear. But we also, and it's an ongoing conversation, we don't know the answer to yet, has to inspire the entrepreneurs to still grow in Europe and to still grow and cross markets and go scale from Slovakia to Germany to France, etc.
Yeah. Now it's clear. Thank you for explaining that. One more thing which I have on you, because I think this is very much related to smaller companies. The questions from Stano Kucharik is: could you please briefly explain how DSA and DMA will impact crowdsourcing platforms or a gig economy, maybe? So how the crowdsourcing would be impacted by these benefits?
And that's an excellent question, probably for an entire panel in itself. But I will say that we did a study actually on a related subject last year. We studied basically how the DSA will impact the business users of online platforms, and the gig workers are part of this, of these business users, right? So we were playing through different scenarios of the DSA. For instance, if new liability requirements mean that short-term postings can only go up with a lot of delay, there would be 3 million gig jobs, more or less, in Europe, which would struggle to operate the same way they do today.
Thank you.
That's just one example. I'm happy to share the study afterwards, but it's kind of an open discussion on how the impact will be on the online platforms and how that trickles down to the gig economy.
Thank you for that. Now, Ciara, I will turn to you. We have heard that many more obligations are going to come, not only to smaller companies, but also to larger companies. Did you, or maybe your organization, evaluate how much more costly it will be for companies to fulfill those obligations that are coming in? Is there some kind of unification, let's say?
So we haven't actually made calculations because we vary different per company.
Absolutely.
And also per service, actually. So
what does it depend on then? That's a correct question.
Well, so there's the risk assessment that's required from the very large online platforms that will create a completely different approach to how to tackle risk, and will require not just a compliance obligation, but also to actually be able to foresee upcoming risks. So there's going to be an infrastructural cost there in which you have to prepare to actually do this risk assessment if that's not already the case, and then the rollout of the services that need to be put in place to tackle the issues. Now, obviously, the breadth of where, in how many different areas that might be, we're already seeing that whereas the focus of the DSA is illegal content, the codes of practices and the risk assessment are going into harmful content, which is a completely different ballgame, such as, for example, on disinformation, where that's going to be one of the first examples that they're going to have a concrete code. The code of practice that was set up as an industry initiative 3 years ago is now going to get folded into the DSA as one of the codes of conduct under the DSA. But that means that we're venturing completely into a different level of risk assessment on harmful content. And that one is difficult because it's not, we don't have the legal definitions. And I think, if I may, I tried to raise the comment before, building on what Benedikt was saying to your question to Mr. Orovic, if Slovakia would be doing an own initiative piece of legislation to contest with the DSA, for example, I think, again, the level of success is not necessarily in putting up a competing piece of legislation. Actually, the strength is now in the hands of the European Parliament and the member states to focus, to make sure that the instruments that are being discussed remain focused on finding solutions, as opposed to having a discussion for 5, 6, 10 years, which none of us can afford at the moment, because then the member states will have to put competing legislation forward. And I think that that's where the success will lie, in how strong can the member states stand in showing that refrain, because it doesn't mean that we don't want to solve more. We do, but I think we need to show restraint right now in focusing on what we can find solutions to, and then, for example, expand to the next level. So focus on illegal content and then see what we can do on harmful. Focus on now tackling the content issues, and maybe if there are further discussions that need to be dealt with in verticals, like one of the issues, and I think that might be coming up, is that there are discussions on whether you need to have different obligations for different kinds of services, like marketplaces versus social media. That in itself will cause double the amount of debate at European level, double the amount of time. So I think let's see that we get at least that horizontal level and the approach agreed upon, and then see what verticals are needed to complement that.
Do you already see, we were talking about dangerous initiatives. We've already mentioned that coming up with own national legislation is absolutely not a good way. We are looking for a horizontal European-wide legislation. But do you see any kind of other dangerous initiatives, maybe from other organizations? Doesn't need to be don't need to be only states. You don't need to be way too particular. You don't need to name anybody, blame or shame. But do you see that something may be harmful already at that early stage?
Well, I think depending on which side of the table you're sitting, you always find the opposing side potentially.
But it seems to be a round table, as we have so many actors involved, right?
And that's where how we have to see it. We have to see it as a round table where everybody has a right to bring their voice to the table, and we weigh up what the consequences are. Because going at it as in, and we've had examples in the past if you look at copyright legislation, for example, where we really were pitted one side of the debate against the other, it's harmful to the debate itself. And it would be a shame if we all miss out because that's the kind of situation that's created, but that we rather try and find that middle ground to work in. So that's what we're hoping.
So would you give us some maybe examples that you see some dangerous or slightly dangerous initiatives?
I can probably throw out an example where some of the focus is going towards the business models as opposed to talking about the issue at hand, which is content moderation in the DSA. If we focus on content moderation, we can find solutions. If we're going to try and use that instrument to tackle the ad-based business model, then you're starting to have the debate on is an ad-based business model a way forward, yes or no? Can that be taken forward? What does that mean, for example, for traditional publishers, because they use ad-based model as well? Is it only about targeted advertising? And it becomes a completely different debate than what the intention is.
And also regarding the illegal content and harmful content, the question, there are already plenty of exceptions regarding for instance, third-party content being published. Do you think that it can, again, extend into up to the amount of something that will, at the end of the day, be not concrete at all, and we are not going to manage even to reach the illegal content proper proper characteristics or if
well, that's why we're trying to be very blunt at the moment in asking our questions, because, for example, we need to understand what kind of what illegal content are we talking about. I'll give you a concrete example. If you have a video online that is supposed to be a video of somebody doing something, but in the background that there's an illegal activity taking place, like a theft or a carjacking or something like that, is that video then illegal content because it's showing an illegal activity in the background? Or is it a video that has, as a consequence, because of where it was located, it portrays an illegal content? So we need to make sure that at least on the basic definitions that we're very clear on what we're talking about. So that we don't, because I don't think we have the space to go into, and we have had that in other pieces of legislation, where we leave it up to litigation to sort it out. I don't think that this is the kind of instrument where we can afford that. So we need to get the legal definition right. The other thing is, what you rightly said, is focus on illegal content, because we cannot, and that's what makes this piece so different than NetzDG, for example, in Germany. In Germany, why can NetzDG work? Because they had a very clear definition of what constitutes the kind of content that they can cover. We don't have these definitions for harmful content at EU level, nor will we be able to agree on that across all of the member states. So that's why it is extremely important that even though there might be a sociological and an individual want to cover some harmful content, we can't actually today deal with it just because we don't have those definitions to work with across the EU, and we need to recognize that.
Thank you. So it seems that the definitions will be crucial, but they may be absolutely, at the end of the day, very wide. I will turn to our audience, also encourage you to post more questions at the Slido with the hashtag DSA-DMA. By then, also continue with the polls if interested. And I actually had the questions. We received a couple of questions before this event, so I will turn to them, turn to those, and if you feel like that you want to say or comment on it, you are very much welcome. So the question was whether there will be the new rules changing regarding the liabilities of services and service providers, which we now know under GDPR or e-commerce. So the question is whether how probably the DSA and DMA will be related to e-commerce and GDPR, maybe at large, and perhaps a little bit more in details. If anybody, you can raise your hand, and I can see you all four of you. Siada seem to be yes. Please.
Well, I can just refer to something. The EDPS actually issued an opinion on how some of the content moderation techniques could have an impact or could be impacted by the obligations with regards to personal data in the GDPR. Mm-hmm. And I think that's exactly what I mean in terms of coherence that we need to look at. How is it going to touch upon other pieces of legislation and make sure that there's no contradiction there, that what the obligations are asking for can actually take place, as opposed to being a great idea but not practical once it hits the ground.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. If anybody would like to comment on this, yes, Mr. Oravec, please.
Actually, I don't want to comment on this. I would like to comment on the interventions made earlier.
Thank you, yes.
And I think it was Benedict who was saying that now what is proposed is to have the rules for big businesses, then for other companies, and there are the exemptions for the smallest businesses. And I think that where is one of the very useful and interesting topics when we debate EU legislation and its preparation is the principle of EU, which is think small first. And it is a very useful principle in theory, but I very rarely seen the good implementation of that principle. Because what usually happens is exactly this, that the policymakers, they produce sort of complex regulations, and then they justify themselves saying, well, it's complex, but we will make an exemption for smallest businesses. And I don't think it's the right approach. The right approach is to draft legislation that will be easy to understand and implement even by the smallest businesses. But it's not really much happening. And in this case, I would say that, of course, everybody knows that big companies are the target of most of this legislation. But let me use a parallel that if we go fishing, usually each of us has a big fish in mind, but it is not the best way to get the big fish by throwing the grenade into the lake, because by that way you get all big fishes, but at the same time you get all small fishes in the lake, and this is not the good approach, I think. If we are targeting the giants, we need to make sure that we are not killing the dwarf. And we need to make sure and to create the environment that all giant companies, small companies will be able to be more competitive, more innovative, and to provide more services and more innovative services to customers. And I need to apologize myself, as I informed you earlier, yes, that I would need to leave the panel now. Of course, this is very interesting debate, very important topic for the future of all our economies. But as you've noticed, we have also the corona crisis, and in Slovakia, even the government crisis at the same time. So I am going to have meetings concerning these two other topics as well. But let me say the final sentence: we will make sure from the Ministry of Economy that the Digital Services Act and Digital Market Act and the consultation about them and forming official Slovak position will be very high on the agenda of Ministry of Economy and the Slovak government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. My apologies for not warning the audience, but thank you very much for coming and also explaining the position of Slovakia and introducing that we will have the consultation which are in place. I think Benedict wanted to react, if I'm not mistaken. If not, I have a question for you.
I just to underline in 30 seconds, we have a member who keeps telling us, good laws work for everyone, bad laws need exemptions. So I fully underline the idea that we should think small first. I think we have to be aware more and more that think small first means to think SME, but also to think startup first. And Startup First is a bit different with all these thresholds we're setting, because startups want to grow beyond them one day. But I'm sure we can put ourselves on a track to get there, and provide you with one statistic, because 2 years ago we did a survey of over 250 investors in startup ecosystems, and 81% agreed with the idea or the notion that oftentimes policymakers trying to hit big players end up causing more collateral damage with the smaller players, the startups. So I think there is a real concern in the ecosystem about that, and that's why this conversation is so important.
Thank you. I will go also to the questions that I mentioned that were received in advance. DMA, for instance, we were talking about it, is not going to change merger rules. But many startups are trying or growing or scaling themselves up in order to really be bought by bigger tech companies. So do you think that the new legislation that is proposed may be kind of constraining this mindset of really grow, bring great idea into the place, and that let the company to be bought by a bigger company?
I think that is a valid concern. Honestly, we're not at the end of understanding kind of the depth here, because there is a list of prohibitions and obligations which apply for everyone, and there's so many different kind of business models out there that I think nobody has really understood the full extent of what these prohibitions and obligations mean. Now, you're absolutely right that formally the DMA is not a competition tool, but actually, there's articles in there about notifying acquisitions, and we do feel there is a sort of a competition element in here, although it's not formally kind of said so. Now, just one example, there is a prohibition on combining data from core services with other services for Gatekeeper. And I mean, I think most of us would know in Brussels that this is coming from the Facebook WhatsApp merger, which didn't go down super well in with the European institutions at the time and with many European citizens. But what is this prohibition saying for all the other potential acquisitions which might be relevant and valuable for consumers, for businesses, for societies as well? There's tons of acquisitions happening, and as I said before, they bring value to an ecosystem. They multiply back knowledge, capital, and investment. So are we maybe not kind of using one brush to color the whole ecosystem here? And are we understanding the consequences and the ramifications for everyone? I don't think so yet.
Good. I think we have Mr. Stefanitz coming in. Then the technicians will deal with it. One more question for you. Ways to tackle illegal content. We already talked about it with Siada. So ways to tackle illegal content spreading from larger platforms to smaller platforms is again a big topic in the discussion. So will there be will this legislation be able to respond, or vice versa? Will the startups be able to respond to the legislation if it asks to build up adequate tools to kind of tackle the illegal content? Because of course the debate was whether to bring up such tools will be way too costly for startups. How much you are concerned by those talks?
I think, right, the DSA component on due diligence is very broad, and there's a lot of different measures. And I think but the total bill at the end of the day will be considerable. What we like in the DSA is something in Chapter 2 is that we are looking at giving startups and platforms the incentives to take own proactive measures themselves to tackle illegal content online. The e-commerce directive, which kind of is a discussion from long ago, had the system in place whereby if you become more active, you kind of had a higher chance of being liable. This is gone, and we think that's a good idea because no startup or platform wants to have illegal content, and it's if startups are as consumer focused as no other business in history, it's in their own interest to identify and get rid of illegal content ASAP, because otherwise people will move to another platform. So giving them the ability to take proactive measures is, I think, the right approach, and we should be leveraging the incentives of the platforms to do the right thing way more in this.
Incentives, yes, thank you very much. We only have a couple of minutes to finish our discussion, so I'm going to give each of you a short floor for maybe explaining or giving some practical advices to either businesses or consumers that we have, to the audience also as well. Let's start with Mr. Štefanec. What would you expect for upcoming months to happen, and how do you think consumers, businesses, either small or larger, should approach this process of discussion? What should they bring to the table? How to really get involved at the level to really influence this major piece of legislation that is upcoming?
Right. First of all, apologies for my connection, which was broken. I realized it was the same time as when Mr. Oravec left, so it shows how we are interconnected, public sphere. Just kidding. But coming back to the question, yes, I think I would recommend small businesses also to cooperate in respective organization. They would be stronger if they cooperate together. We have plenty of them. Also on the European level, we have very strong European association. I'm sure Benedict is aware of that. He is one of representatives, and even now, I receive really daily, a lot of inputs for DSA and DMA from big platforms, from small companies, from consumer associations. So just my advice is to be active and to formulate your position now. I contact many associations, many stakeholders, and all the inputs are very available. Now it's time to set up position and to propose it to the European Parliament. I'm very open. You can contact me via email or even directly. It's possible to set up a video call. And I'm sure also many MEPs are available as well. So don't hesitate to formulate your position. It's very appreciated if businesses are active, because it's better to be active right now than after the implementation. Absolutely. And last just remark, it's really our intention to unify offline and online rules. It is my remark towards illegal and even harmful content. I know it's not easy. It's a big challenge for this legislation. But if we have the same rules which are applied online and offline, I think it would be a big success of this legislation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Štefanec. Benedict, the question very similar to you. What would you advise, especially smaller, medium enterprises and particularly startups, to focus on for the upcoming maybe weeks and months in order really to let their voice to be heard?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to what has been said before. We understand startups have a million things going on, and COVID has just amplified the situation that you're thinking about cash flow in the next 4 to 6 weeks, and that a piece of EU legislation, which is maybe coming into force 3-5 years from now, is not on the top list of your priorities. But I encourage you to take half an hour of your day to have a look at this one, because it will be all-encompassing, the DSA file. And we have a slogan on our banners all the time, which says that you're either at the table or on the menu. And so I really encourage all the platforms to speak up, have a voice. The Commission has actually a short consultation, which is online, which is actually due next week. So there's a chance directly next week already to give your feedback to the Commission, or to reach out to your trade bodies or to your local representatives like Mr. Štefanec as well.
Thank you very much, Benedict. And Siada, your advices and maybe your kind of vision or foresight for upcoming months.
I'm happy to share that. I think the key thing is to remain eye on the ball, keep an eye on the ball and on the end result, and also to think of solutions as opposed to trying to create divisions, to really focus on the solutions that we can find and how we can move the whole thing forward, as opposed to just clogging it up in making it more complex, because frankly it is complex enough as it is.
Thank you very much for this. I'm sure also Mr. Oravec would suggest to be active and include yourself in some way into the upcoming debate that will be ongoing also in Slovakia, to the open discussion that will be done amongst the stakeholders. So we invite everyone to absolutely be active. Let's wrap up also with the poll, the question: are you concerned that the new DSA, DMA legislation will negatively influence your business model? Most of you said that you do not have enough information to decide. We hope that this format, this discussion helped a little bit. You've seen that many questions are absolutely open, still on the table, still we will be discussing them. And I am sure that AmCham as well as SAPIE will be supporting further discussion on this topic, because, as it was said, it's absolutely a fundamentally important legislation for all Europe, for all customers, consumers, and all the businesses. So the definitions will have to be really properly set. Interestingly, what I see here that either you as audience expressed that you do not have enough information, you have some information, or yes, that you are concerned, but nobody said that is not concerned. So quite a lot of concerns still upcoming. I think this is also something to be that we'll need to have a further discussion. Anyway, thank you very much to you audience for posing questions, sending us questions also through via email and also via Slido. Thank you absolutely to our panelists, Mr. Ivan Štefanec, Mr. Benedikt Blumeyer, Ms. Jada L. Ramley. Thank you for logging in, for being with us, and for sharing your opinions on the upcoming legislation. Also, we send regards to Deputy Minister Jan Oravec. Thank you to the organizers, to AmCham, American Chamber of Commerce, as well as SAPIE. We are looking for further discussions on the topic. My name is Lucia Jar, and I hope that we will see each other in the future as well. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.